There is a person you have encountered before, maybe once, maybe only briefly, but you remember them, not because of what they said, not because of what they did, because of how they made you feel when you were around them, a quality that is difficult to name, but impossible to miss, a kind of settled completeness that made everything you tried to direct at them, every provocation, every attempt to destabilize, every carefully aimed piece of news, designed to produce a reaction, simply not land, not because they were performing indifference, because they were genuinely unreachable, and you could feel the difference between someone pretending not to be affected and someone who simply was not affected. Today we are going into exactly how that person is built, not born, built. 7 ruthless psychological lessons that create the kind of mind that nothing and no one can reach without permission. Stay until lesson 6, because that lesson alone will change the way you respond to the most difficult people in your life permanently. In the winter of 170 AD, Marcus Aurelius was commanding Roman legions on the Danube. The conditions were brutal. The cold was killing men. The campaign had stretched far beyond what anyone anticipated. Supplies were running short. Morale was collapsing. And every general around him, every experienced military mind he had assembled, was showing, in different ways, the effect of the pressure. Some became erratic. Some became cruel. Some simply shut down. And Marcus Aurelius sat in his tent at night and wrote, not strategy, not complaints. He wrote the private philosophy that would eventually become one of the most studied documents in human history. Meditations. A man under extreme pressure, the most powerful man in the known world, in the middle of a brutal campaign, carrying the weight of millions of lives, writing notes to himself about how to remain mentally free, mentally rooted, mentally untouchable, not because the pressure was not real, because he had built something inside that pressure could not reach. And what he built, what he described in those private pages, never intended for any other eyes, is exactly what we are going to reconstruct today. 7 lessons, 7 psychological truths that make a person's mind genuinely, permanently, completely untouchable. The first lesson is the one that everything else rests on, and it is the one that most people spend their entire lives never fully accepting. You are not your circumstances. This sounds simple, almost obvious, but most people do not actually believe it. They believe it as a concept. They can say it convincingly. They can even feel it briefly in moments when circumstances happen to be good. But the moment circumstances turn genuinely difficult, the moment the pressure is real and sustained, and the outcomes are uncertain, most people discover that they were not separate from their circumstances at all. They were constituted by them. Their mood, their self-concept, their sense of what is possible, their fundamental orientation toward the day, all of it rises and falls with what is happening around them. And a person whose interior rises and falls with their exterior has no interior. Not really. They have a reflection of their environment. Sophisticated, articulate, perhaps very intelligent, but not independent, not free. Epictetus spent his entire life teaching this one lesson with a directness that has never been surpassed. He had been a slave. He had had nothing, not his freedom, not his comfort, not any of the external conditions most people believe are necessary for psychological stability, and he had discovered, through years of the most extreme possible testing, that none of those things were actually necessary, that the one thing genuinely necessary for a settled, powerful, completely autonomous inner life was the clarity to understand what was actually yours, your judgments, your responses, your values, your attention. These things were yours. Everything else, every circumstance, every outcome, every other person's behavior, was not. And the moment you genuinely accept this boundary, the moment you stop trying to find your stability in the territory that was never yours, something settles in you that no external force can subsequently unsettle, because there is nothing there for it to grab. The second lesson is about how the mind relates to difficulty. Most people treat difficulty as an interruption, as something that should not be happening. That represents a departure from how things are supposed to go. And every time difficulty arrives, every setback, every betrayal, every situation that does not resolve the way they needed it to, they experience it as a violation, something wrong happening in a world where things are supposed to go right. And this experience, this sense of wrongness, of injustice, of things not being as they should be, produces a specific quality of psychological suffering that is almost entirely optional. Marcus Aurelius returned to this insight repeatedly throughout his private journals. He wrote from multiple angles, trying to capture the precise thing that made difficulty something other than the permanent emergency most people experience it as. He settled on this: the obstacle is not against the path. The obstacle is the path, not as motivation, as precise psychological fact. The mind that has internalized this, the mind that meets difficulty, not as a violation, but as the specific material it was built to work with, experiences the same events in a fundamentally different way than the mind that is still waiting for difficulty to stop before it can function properly. It does not become less affected. It becomes affected differently. It meets the difficulty with the focused interest of something encountering what it was designed for. And that shift from violation to material is one of the most significant psychological upgrades available to any human being. The third lesson is about the specific mechanism through which other people gain access to your internal state without your permission. The mechanism is this: you care what they think, not in the abstract sense, in the specific, neurologically active sense of genuinely having your internal state affected by their assessment of you. Their approval raises something in you. Their disapproval lowers it. Their attention produces a warmth. Their indifference produces a chill. And because this mechanism is active, because your internal state is genuinely responsive to their internal state toward you, they have, without any effort, without any strategy, without even being aware of it, a hand on a lever inside your psychology. And anyone with a hand on a lever can move what the lever controls. The mentally untouchable person is not someone who has eliminated caring. They are someone who has developed a specific clarity about whose assessment is actually relevant to their understanding of themselves. Most people's sense of themselves is built, in significant part, from the outside in, from what others say, reflect, confirm. The mentally untouchable person has built theirs from the inside out, from their own standards, their own honest assessment of their own choices, their own considered view of who they are and what they are doing and whether it is worthy of them. And because the foundation is internal, because it was built from things they control rather than things they do not, it is not accessible to external tampering. Marcus Aurelius wrote this as a direct challenge to himself: if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. He was not asking for external confirmation. He was building the internal standard that made external confirmation simply unnecessary. The fourth lesson is about the relationship between reaction and power. Every time you react to something that was designed to produce a reaction, Every time someone does something, and your immediate, automatic, completely undeliberate response confirms that they found what they were looking for. You have demonstrated something that cannot be easily taken back. You have demonstrated that you are reachable, that the right input produces the predictable output, that your internal state is not fully yours, that it can be altered by someone else's behavior without your conscious participation. And once someone knows this, once they have seen the mechanism demonstrated, they know something about you that gives them a structural advantage in every future interaction. The mentally untouchable person has developed what Epictetus called the gap, the space between stimulus and response, where freedom lives, where the self actually lives, where the person you have decided to be gets to arrive before the person you automatically are has already taken over. This gap is not natural. It is built through the deliberate practice of pausing in real time, in real situations, with real pressure, and choosing, not suppressing, choosing. The difference is critical. Suppression is a delay. The reaction is still there, still active, still in control, just postponed. A genuine choice is different. It is the replacement of an automatic response with a deliberate one. And the person who has practiced this replacement consistently enough that it has become their default is a person who, from the outside, appears to be in a completely different category of psychological organization than almost everyone around them, because they are. The fifth lesson is about what makes people genuinely threatening to you, not the obvious threats, the subtle ones. The people whose power over you is not in what they do, but in what they make you do to yourself. The person who is skilled at managing your fear is not your problem. Fear is obvious. You can see it coming. You can prepare. The dangerous person is the one who is skilled at managing your hope, your desire for their approval, your investment in a version of the relationship or the situation that they have learned to hold just out of reach, always possible, never quite delivered. And your mind, which is oriented toward the resolution of uncertainty, keeps returning to the question of what you need to do to close the gap, to finally get the thing that keeps being implied but withheld. And in returning to that question, you are giving them the most complete access possible to your cognitive resources, your time, your energy, your focus, all of it organized around a question they designed. The mentally untouchable person recognizes this pattern before it completes, not through suspicion, through clarity, through the practiced ability to see exactly what is happening when their own hope is being used to organize their attention towards someone else's benefit, and through the willingness, genuinely, completely, to release the hope, rather than continue paying the price of maintaining it. The sixth lesson, the one I promised, is the one that changes everything about how you handle the most difficult people in your life. The lesson is this: difficult people are not obstacles placed in your path. They are the path, not in a motivational sense, in a precise, psychologically specific sense. Every difficult person in your life is presenting you with the exact challenge that your current level of development needs in order to advance. They are not doing this deliberately. They are not your teacher in any conscious or intentional sense, but the challenge they represent, the specific way their behavior activates your fear, your pride, your need for approval, your old wounds, is precisely calibrated to the current frontier of your psychological development, because it is the frontier. The places where you react are the places where you are not yet free, and the difficult people who reliably find those places, who reliably produce in you the reactions you are most ashamed of, The responses you most wish you had handled differently are, in the most precise sense, your most useful teachers. Not because what they do is acceptable, because how you respond to it tells you everything about where your work is. Marcus Aurelius understood this, and wrote about it, with more direct honesty than almost any philosopher before him. He described the people who frustrated him most, not as enemies, but as occasions to practice what he was trying to build, occasions to discover where the building was still incomplete, and he was grateful, genuinely, not performatively, for the precision of the challenge, because a vague challenge builds vague strength. The specific challenge of a specific difficult person builds something much more useful, the specific capacity to remain free in the exact circumstances that previously took your freedom. The seventh and final lesson is the one that holds all the others, the foundation beneath every other foundation. The reason that all 6 lessons we have discussed today are actually available to any human being, rather than only to the exceptional ones. The lesson is this: the mind is plastic. It changes in response to what it practices, not quickly, not easily, not without the specific discomfort that all genuine change requires, but it changes. The person who consistently practices returning to their own interior, who consistently practices inserting the gap between stimulus and response, who consistently practices releasing the need for external validation, who consistently practices meeting difficulty as material rather than violation, is building something in the literal architecture of their mind that was not there before. And what they are building is not a technique, not a strategy, not a collection of useful concepts to deploy when needed, a way of being, a settled, rooted, completely genuine orientation toward life, in which the things that used to take their freedom simply no longer can, not because those things have stopped trying, because the person who can be moved by them no longer fully exists. In their place is someone who has built, through years of daily, private, unglamorous practice, the one thing that cannot be manufactured, performed, or inherited, a mind that is genuinely, permanently, completely their own. Subscribe to Dark Stoic. Every single week, we go exactly this deep. This is only the beginning. Subscribe and begin building the mind that nothing can reach.